creation sings with the morning sun as your glory fills the sky. And the valleys rise up and the mountains bow low, singing hallelujah. And so sings my soul, rejoice in the anthem loud with resounding voice. And the stars beyond with the moon respond, singing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah. The glory of the Lord has been revealed in the rising of the sun. On the mount of despair, a stone of hope has appeared, singing hallelujah. And so sings my soul, rejoice in the anthem loud with resounding voice. Salvation made plain and the way made straight, singing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah. Oh, 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 hey. What a holy mystery, call the mountains from the seas, and breathe the breath of life into dust. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. Oh, sing hallelujah. And so sings my soul, rejoice in the anthem loud with resounding voice. From lovely circumstance, swept up in your holy dance, sing hallelujah. And so sings my soul, rejoice in the anthem loud with resounding voice. From lovely circumstance, swept up in your holy dance, sing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah.
This extension program offers students a hybrid experience that starts and ends with up-close interaction in the classroom, but the bulk of the work is done from home, with minimal disruption to their already hectic lives.
We designed 2 degree programs that would provide the tools and the necessary resources for them to do well in ministry. We are thrilled by these 2 programs, and we are thrilled because they can be completed in 2 and 3 years.
Houston-Galveston students are able to earn their degree in a flexible program without moving to Dallas. They're able to continue working their current jobs, many of them in local churches, while earning their degree.
The great majority of our professors that teach in Houston-Galveston are our full-time Perkins faculty. That makes a tremendous difference in the quality of these courses, and for this reason, I think our students in Houston-Galveston get the best of 2 worlds. They get the tools that they need for ministry, but at the same time, they get a very academically rigorous program.
Persons interested in SMU Perkins information sessions can contact Dr. Stephen Bagby, Director of Recruitment and Admission, or by visiting the SMU Perkins website.
All right, welcome back. I am so glad again that you're here. Welcome to all of you who are joining us online as well. Thank you so much for your participation. And today, in this session, we are going to be looking at the future of the church. And is there a future for the church? And we're going to begin with a lot of data. We're going to have a chance to hear from Savannah Kimberlin from the Barna Group. She has got a wealth of information she's going to be sharing with us, both about what COVID has done to the church. How has COVID affected the church? What will our response be going forward? And we're going to be talking more about that in the second part of the session. And then she's going to help us to focus on younger generations. And what does the data that Barna has help us understand and know about millennials, Gen Z, and future generations, and why some have stayed in the church, why some have left the church, and what the implications of that are for us in our local congregations. So I want to begin with a word of prayer, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker for this time. Let's begin in prayer. God, once more, open our ears to hear and our hearts to receive all that you have for us. Help us to process the data that we need to hear and understand. Help us to think about, make the connections and links for us between this data and our congregations, so that we might be the church for such a time as this, and that we might be the church in the future that you need us to be. So guide us, we pray. Bless our speaker, Savannah Kimberlin, we ask in Christ's name. Amen. So I want to introduce you to Savannah Kimberlin. Savannah graduated from Stanford University with a degree in mathematics and a minor in worship leadership. Now, I want you to think about the combination of those two things. A math degree and a minor in worship leadership, not what you usually think of going together. She earned her master's of analytics from the University of Alabama. She is a certified data miner and a certified predictive modeler. She served as a data analyst for churches. She founded Church Analytics Group, and she's worked for the Barna Group for the last 4 years, first as a data analyst and currently as the Director of Research Solutions. And she's got a lot of data that's going to bless and help you. Have your pens ready to write, or whatever you're taking notes on, have those ready. And I want you to give a warm welcome to Savannah Kimberlin.
Hello, everybody. Who loves data? Who is so excited to see charts? I love it. I love it. When we received this invitation as Barna to come and speak with you today, it was an easy yes, because we knew this room would be full of people who love research, who want to be data-informed leaders, who want to be highly strategic in our leadership, striving to understand people deeply, to understand how they tick so that we can serve them better and lead them well. So that is why I'm really, really pumped to be here and to tackle this topic with you, the state of the church. Thought that was a wonderful introduction. That's exactly where we're going to head today. We're going to talk about COVID and the disruptions that we have all felt. I know every single one of you can say, yes, certainly I've felt rattled. I've felt disrupted this past year. And then we are going to talk about young people a little bit and get strategic. So that is where we're headed over the course of the next 30 minutes. Before we get started, though, before we start thinking about the present moment and thinking about the future and where we're headed, I would like for us to firstly start by looking back. So what I'm about to show you is a trend line of church attendance from 1993. It's actually quite remarkable that Barna has this data in our warehouses somewhere, that we have all this historic data that we've been tracking church attendance since the 90s. So here we go. Let's look back as we prepare ourselves to look ahead. So this is the trend line of the percentage of adults in the US who have attended church weekly. And you see that this trend line, starting around 93 until about 2007, 2008, 2009, is pretty steady. If anything, we see a small uptick right around 2007, 2006, so that's great. But something drastic happened in our churches and in our nation right around 2008, 2009, 2010. That is when the downward trend begins. So if you've been in ministry, if you've been a pastor for more than 10 years, and you've ever said to yourself, man, leading my church today feels radically different than it did 10 years ago, you're not wrong. A lot has changed in the last 10 years. So naturally, this chart begs the question, well, then what happened? Like what triggered this trend around 2008, 2009? We can't say for sure, but a couple of things that happened in our nation and in the world right around that time, some things that maybe can help to explain what we're seeing here. We know that the iPhone was invented in 2007. We know that Facebook exploded with popularity worldwide in 2008. We know that the top end of the millennial generation was entering adulthood right around that time. So there was the new millennial generation that was starting to become employees of organizations. They were graduating from college. We know there was a presidential election in 2008. We know that there was an economic downturn in our nation right around that time. So we can't say for sure, but what we can say is that all of the necessary ingredients were put in the blender here in the United States right around that time that started a downward trend. So why do I show this to you? What I'm hoping to communicate is that the church was certainly facing a disruptive future even before the pandemic. We know that, especially as mainline Protestant leaders, which many, if not all of us are here in this room, that our churches perhaps were struggling even before the pandemic. Perhaps our churches were shrinking gradually over time, even before the pandemic. You're not alone in that. Our whole nation has felt this downward trend. So knowing where we've been and knowing that we were facing a disruptive future as church leaders, even before the pandemic, how do we respond to this present moment? How do we respond to the further disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic? And how do we face the future? I think over the course of this presentation, I could most certainly spend my time talking about the not so good data, the dismal news perhaps of how churches are struggling. And I will share some of that to the point where it's helpful. But I really would like for us to turn our focus to the signs of hope and opportunity that we have in this moment as leaders in the midst of disruption, in the midst of decline, to reverse that trend. How can we build off of some momentum that perhaps maybe our churches have begun to accumulate during the COVID-19 pandemic? We'll talk about that maybe a little bit. Maybe there's some new momentum, some fresh vision. And how do we lead forward? How do we lead forward? So I'm going to answer these two questions. How has the church changed during COVID-19? The bad, but also the good. Absolutely also the good. Our research suggests that there are signs of hope and opportunity. And then how do we serve and engage emerging generations moving forward? So let's begin with this first item. How has the church changed during COVID-19? Let's start with church attendance trends, just to lay a solid foundation so we can understand how churches across the nation as a whole have shifted and changes that have occurred over the course of the last 2 years. We've been very busy at Barna researching church attendance trends and trying to understand how people are behaving. So hopefully I'm gonna give you just some helpful information today. There also was a wonderful slide deck put together of data from you guys that you answered questions about your own church attendance trends. And I believe that's available to you all within your app. So if you haven't had the chance to go review that slide deck, please do. That was really, really helpful. So, right, church attendance trends. Let's go ahead and get started. So this slide is really busy. I know it's very busy, but I'm gonna walk you through it. So on the left side, we have pre-pandemic attendance trends from 2019, so the end of 2019. And then on the right, we have data that we collected in September of 2020, so right in the middle of the COVID moment. I would like to direct your attention to these red bars right here, the practicing Christian data. So who are practicing Christians? This is a Barna term. Essentially, we can think of practicing Christians as being those faithful, church-going Christians who really care about staying engaged with you guys as church leaders. They want to stay plugged into congregations, the faithful few, right? The faithful few. And we see that before the pandemic, 79% of these practicing Christians said that they had attended church within the past week. During the pandemic, only 51% of those faithful few were attending church weekly. So that's a 30 percentage point drop, the faithful few. So why am I showing this to you? Why am I highlighting this data point? I want to communicate to us that the congregants who have stepped away from being involved with our churches are not necessarily just those fringe participants. Many of our faithful, devoted attendees have stepped away for the time being. So just to maybe alleviate that belief. And now I want to direct our attention to the percentage of both practicing Christians and just all churched adults who say that they had never attended church during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's 19% of those practicing Christians and 22% of all churched adults. So what you're looking at, remember, is data from September 2020. We asked this question again in May of 2021, and the percentages were the exact same. Still, in May of 2021, only 19% of practicing Christians, 90% of practicing Christians had said that they had never attended church. So what does that communicate? Just something for us, hopefully, that can help us in understanding these attendance trends. If people weren't attending in 2020, they were not attending in the summer of 2021. If they were gone, they were gone. And that was nationwide, across denominations. So that was the behavior that we were observing over the course of 2021. 1 in 5 practicing Christians, 1 in 5 churchgoers has never attended church over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. They've completely pulled away. So this begs the question then, will these dropouts come back? If that percentage is about 1 in 5, will the dropouts come back? That's what church leaders ask us after they see this data. Are they going to come back? So I'm going to show you some data that hopefully will be able to answer this question for you. I will say, if you're on our email list, shameless plug, we are about to conduct some research to hopefully look and see what the attendance trends have looked like in our churches this fall. We're going to actually begin that next week. So we hope to be able to very quickly answer the question for you all of what has attendance looked like this fall. But we know that over the course of the summer, much had continued to be disrupted to the same extent that it had been in 2020. So will the dropouts come back? Here's maybe some data to help us answer that question. Here are 3 statements that we asked churchgoers in September, and then again we asked them in May 2020, and May 2021. And what you're looking at is data from this past summer, up here on the slide right now. So imagine when you see churchgoers, so this data represents churchgoers, interpret it this way. This is everybody on your email list. Okay, so everybody that you are trying to communicate with on your email list, this is how they probably feel. I am waiting for church services to go back to normal before I return. Half of churchgoers feel that way. Half of the people on your email list probably feel that way. So what does that communicate to us? Even in the middle of summer 2021, there was still this sense of, I'm waiting for normalcy. I'm waiting for normalcy. So this period of waiting had not yet lifted for half of the people that you are serving. I'm spiritually growing during this pandemic in ways other than church attendance. 73% of people agree with that statement. I think that's something for us all to wrestle through and wrestle with as church leaders. So the majority of people say, okay, I'm continuing to feed myself, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm feeding myself by being a part of a local church, but I am feeding myself. How do we feel about that as church leaders? I would argue that's actually probably a good thing that people at least are saying, I'm continuing to feed myself. But so how do we champion that, but then also bring them back into the family and into community, right? But they are feeding themselves. The majority of them say, yes, I am still growing. And then finally, this last item is the one that I probably want to draw your attention to with the most heightened intensity here. I am not interested in church engagement because I've been rethinking or drifting from my faith practice. 16% of the people you're looking to serve feel that way. Now, if we only look at young people, we only look at Gen Z and millennials, so think people 35 and younger. If we look at that age cohort, this number increases to 20%. So 1 in 5 of the young people that we've been looking to serve feel this way. They will admit on a survey, I am rethinking things, I am drifting. How do we shepherd these young people, these people? 1 in 5, it's the minority, but it's a notable minority, isn't it? How do we shepherd them, and how do we convince them, or perhaps even just remind them that being a part of a local church is important? How do we shepherd them through their season of rethinking and their season of drifting? Something for us to consider. So will the dropouts come back? To return back to that thought, well, if I'm looking at this data, I can say, all right, well, a lot of people are still in that season of waiting for normalcy. A lot of people say, okay, I am spiritually growing, but a fair minority are saying, I'm rethinking things. How does this data impact how we shepherd our people? Hopefully that was helpful for you as you think about church attendance trends. I did some custom analysis for you guys today that I'm really excited to share with you to hopefully understand church attendance trends a little bit better. I pulled out just the data that we had collected from mainline Protestants, which includes Methodist churches. So I pulled that out for us and ran some analysis so you can understand which groups of people within mainline Protestant denominations are remaining engaged and which maybe have pulled away. So I'm going to show you some demographics here. Out of all mainline Protestant Christians this summer, 39% of them have attended a church service within the past week, okay? 39%. So out of everybody who calls themselves a mainline Protestant Christian, meaning they're aligned with the mainline Protestant denomination, it's about 40%. This is basically on par, I will say, with Protestant non-mainline denominations. So when we're talking about church attendance trends and we're comparing mainline to non-mainline, it's no better or no worse. So we're kind of all in the same boat right now, okay? So if we look at the data by gender, we see that males are more engaged than females, which is interesting. I don't know what that means, but maybe something to flag and to think, okay, does my church reflect that, or what do I think about that trend? And then this generation's data. Gen X has pulled away the most, and Gen Z and millennials have been the most engaged. Now, I will say, we know that the Gen Z and millennial age cohort is the smallest cohort represented in our mainline churches, but the ones who are a part of our mainline churches are the ones who are most engaged. So maybe that has been your experience as well. Your young people have been more faithful than the people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s within your churches. So that's what we're seeing across the nation. Ethnic minorities have been more engaged than white adults, and those with children have been more engaged, far more engaged actually, than those without children. So maybe that's a red flag for us as pastors. You've probably prioritized taking care of families over the course of the last 2 years, but have you connected with those without children? Those who don't have that children's ministry element as an anchor to spiritual formation in the household? Are we taking care of them too? Something for us to maybe flag. A lot of them have pulled away and disappeared. So hopefully that was helpful, understanding the state of affairs in mainline denomination churches. So that's the first element that we wanted to explore. The first thing that has changed definitely during the COVID-19 pandemic is church attendance. The second thing I would like to talk about is the church's reputation. We've really devoted a lot of time, especially over the course of 2020. We devoted a lot of time and energy to studying the church's reputation within communities. How is the local community perceiving the church right now, considering that we have done our best to be a safe haven for people emotionally and mentally and spiritually. We've done our best to take care of our congregants. How has that gone? I hope to surprise you today with some good news. We'll see. So we asked in May of 2021, what is your reaction to local churches? When you think of the local church, what do you think of? What's their reputation? Firstly, I'd like to point out that the blue bars on the right are longer than the red bars on the left. The positive outweighs the negative. Maybe you're surprised. This is not always the narrative that we are told, right? So you see there that 74% of Americans say that the church offers hope to people. So as you're walking down the sidewalk and you're passing people in your city, 3 out of every 4 people feel this way. Churched or unchurched, 3 out of every 4 people feel this way. The church offers hope to people. 60% say the church cares about people like me. 61% says the church is generous. 59% says the church is trustworthy. The positive outweighs the negative. It's not always the narrative that you're told. I do think it's important for us to look at those red items, though, and to ground ourselves in that so we can understand the negative components of the church's reputation that we are perhaps combating or battling against as church leaders. I think it's very important for us to be aware of that. So let's jot down those items that are on the left side of this chart as well and reflect on those. So the top negative perception of the church today is that the church is known for the things they are against. The second highest item is judgmental. So you're probably saying, okay, but this is all you as adults. What about young people? 72% of Gen Z and 75% of millennials believe that the church offers hope to people. Even for the young generations, the positive outweighs the negatives. I would like to suggest from this research and from other research that we have done that the COVID-19 pandemic has actually done wonders for the church's reputation. We have shown up, we have taken care of communities, we have loved people well, and people have noticed. The community has noticed. We have not seen positivity like this in our data in a long time. It's good news today. So then we asked, okay, that's interesting. So you have a positive opinion of the church. What about pastors? Do you like pastors? What do you think about pastors? Maybe this surprises you as well. So we see in red responses from churchgoers and in blue responses from the unchurched. So people who are not connected to a local church really in any capacity. So we asked 3 statements. Christian pastors in my community have been strong leaders during the pandemic. Christian pastors in my community have been strong leaders when it comes to racial justice. And I deeply trust Christian pastors in my community. The vast majority of churchgoers agree with those statements. Hopefully you know that. If you don't know that, I mean, good news. Your people like you still. That's good news, I think. A lot of us are tired and feel worn down. But don't worry, the vast majority of our people still believe in us. At least they say so on paper, right? They definitely still agree that we are doing our jobs well. But I want to direct our attention to those blue numbers. We see that this is actually half for the majority even in some of these cases of these unchurched people in our communities that feel this way about our leadership. 57% of unchurched adults. Many of those adults are non-Christian, right? Atheists, agnostics, nuns, they're included in these numbers. Christian pastors in my community have been strong leaders during the pandemic. You have done well. I know you're tired. And I know, like I said before, this is not the narrative you are often told, but you have done well, and your people have noticed. So good job. I'm here to celebrate you and to honor you for the hard work that you have put in. Your people have noticed. Yeah. Good news for us today. The reputation of the church. Maybe we're in a better spot than we thought. Something for us to think through. Thirdly, I would like for us to discuss the pastoral vocation and how that has changed over the course of the pandemic. I wanted to include this item because our research suggests that the pastoral vocation has been one of the top things in the church today that has been rattled due to the pandemic. So I want to show us some numbers, hopefully so we can understand the state of affairs today. 39% of Protestant leaders say that their understanding of their vocation as a pastor has changed within the past year. This is not necessarily a bad thing. If you're taking notes, I would like for you to maybe jot down this question. Has my understanding of my vocation changed within the past year? And in what way? That's something for us to maybe talk with our friends about. I think for those of us who are lay leaders or volunteers who are attending this event and this conference, we need to understand how the pastoral vocation has changed this year as well so that we can support and encourage our staff leaders as they think about the future and lead forward in this moment. 40%. So in the room right now, if I were to draw a line right here, it'd be half of the room. So I'm gonna draw the line right here, about 40%. You guys have all changed your mind a little bit about how you understand your vocation. Is it good? Is it bad? Maybe something for us to reflect on. One thing that we know for sure that has been rattled also, in addition to just understanding vocation, is confidence in calling, in the calling to be a pastor. So what you're looking at is a chart from 2016 on the left. We gathered that data for our State of Pastors research effort that we conducted back in 2016. And then we re-asked questions about confidence in calling in 2020. And I would like to direct our attention primarily to this yellow and orange bar, which is the percent of pastors that admit that they are less confident about their calling today compared to when they first entered the ministry. In 2016, this number was only 3%. It's increased fourfold over the course of the last few years, perhaps even just over the course of the last few months. I will point out it's still only 13% of pastors that feel this way. It's the minority, for sure. It's the minority, but it's increased fourfold. So if you find yourself in this data and you say, I'm a little less confident in my calling today, you're not alone. You're not alone at all. And what does it look like for you to maybe pause and reflect and talk with others who are attending this event as well, and to communicate what that looks like and what that means for you? Many of us are less confident in their calling. So I would say that's probably the bad news of what has emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic. I know we're tired. A lot has been rattled, as I've said. But I would like to point out something that we found in our research, that when it comes to the pastoral vocation and the pastoral calling, might be a good sign. There's certainly a sign of hope that has emerged in our research, and I would like to pose that this is actually really transformative and really a huge deal, really a huge deal for the church, especially here in the U.S. What have we gained? Awareness. We have gained awareness over the course of the last 2 years. So we asked church leaders, do you feel like your awareness of what's going on in your city, events, movements, tensions, etc., has that awareness increased this year? 40% of leaders answer yes. I know it's only 40%. You're like, it's less than half. Trust me, this data is miles beyond anything we've seen with church leaders when it comes to awareness. We've broken out of our bubbles. We've seen in our research pastors say, I've linked arms with other pastors in my community for the first time. We've seen churches partner with parachurch organizations, perhaps for the first time. A lot of awareness has grown, and our research suggests that this awareness is directly linked with those reputation slides that I showed you earlier. That because our awareness has increased, our empathy has increased, our involvement in the local community has increased, and the reputation of the church has been positively impacted because of it. Let's not lose sight of this momentum, awareness. So maybe a question for us to ask ourselves is, has my awareness of what's going on in my city changed? And then what are the long-term implications of this awakening, so to speak? What are the long-term implications? It's a sign of hope when it comes to pastoral calling that I don't want us to lose sight of. Great. So in answering the question of how has the church changed during COVID-19, we talked about church attendance, trends, really grounding ourselves in understanding the numbers of who has stayed and who has left. We talked about the pastoral calling and what has been shaken and what perhaps we've been given, what gift we've been given during the pandemic, a gift in disguise perhaps. And then we've also talked about the church's reputation and how that has been positively affected during the pandemic. So now I'd like to move on to our second topic that we're going to be tackling together, really as we move and transition in this presentation from thinking about the present to thinking about the future as we think forward. And I was asked specifically to show this data. Actually, Adam asked me, he's like, you've got a great slide on millennials, and I would love to see that slide. So I put this in for you guys. Hopefully this helps. We get asked all the time, why have millennials left the church? So what you're looking at is their answers. So these are millennials who grew up Christian and no longer call themselves Christians. So 34-year-olds, it's 36-year-olds down to about 24. Okay, so that's the age cohort that we're looking at that no longer call themselves Christians. Why have they left the church? Definitely snap a picture of this slide. Let's take this to heart, because we as leaders need to think about this and then think through, okay, what's our response to this? So the top reasons that millennials have left the church is, number one, I prefer to distance myself from the politics of the church. That's fascinating. Number two, church teachings have flaws or gaps. Number three, the church does not answer my questions. And number four, the church cannot answer my questions. Do your young people maybe think that your teachings have flaws or gaps? Have you asked them? Maybe ask them and see if you can serve them better, if you can meet their needs better. Similarly, are you answering your young people's questions? The Bible contains everything that they need to know in order to live a fulfilling life, right? So are we answering their questions? Are we helping them practically? Those are some of the reasons why they're pulling away. Hopefully this is helpful. It's interesting, and I do want to point out, people at church are judgmental, or I don't fit in. Those fall fairly low on the list compared to some of these more practical items that are near the top. So let's think that through, all right? Really meeting the practical needs of young people is exceeding some of those reputation items. They've made their needs very clear to us. So let's serve young people well. How do we engage emerging generations? We serve them well. So in my last few minutes with you all, I'm going to hopefully give you some helpful pieces of advice as we think about really engaging the next generation. It's like, okay, you just told me why they've left, but how do I help them stay? Like, how do I really help them stay? And to answer that question, I'm going to use this book. It's a book, Faith for Exiles, that our president, David Kinnaman, wrote 2 years ago. And I'm going to use some of his content to help answer this question. How do we engage emerging generations? Out of all the young people today who grew up Christian, who grew up in Christian households, they today are falling in one of four buckets. They've either left the faith completely, so they're prodigals. They have sort of pulled themselves away, but they haven't completely changed their Christian identity, so we call those nomads. There are habitual churchgoers, which their heart's not in it, but they're still in our congregations. And then there are resilient disciples, okay? Only 10% of those who are raised in churches today are resilient disciples, meet that definition. So as we think about the resilient disciples, I'm gonna share with you some information about their unique qualities and attributes. And why am I doing that? Because it's important for us to learn from the people who have stuck around, because like they're they're the secret sauce, right? We want to learn the secret sauce. If you want to lose weight, for example, you have a friend who has lost 30 pounds, right? And you're like, I want to lose weight. What are you going to do? You're going to go talk to that friend and say, what did you do? What did you eat? What exercise did you do? I want to learn from you so I can replicate it, so I can learn from you and I can move forward and be successful. We're going to use that same sort of logic here, and we're going to learn from resilient disciples. I will say, taking care of the emerging generation today of young people in their 20s and 30s, doing it well is not as simple as just a checklist of things that you have to make sure that you do, right? It's a bit more complicated than that. But if I may simplify it all the way down to a checklist, I think this is a good place for us to start. We want to build resilient disciples. We want to keep people in our churches. What do they need to have and what do they need to do? Number one, resilient disciples have meaningful relationships. Meaningful relationships. Here's some statements for us to think through. The church is a place where I feel I belong. Look at that chart. Oh my gosh. Resilient disciples surpass everyone, even those habitual churchgoers who are still sitting in our pews, by the way. The habitual churchgoers are still sitting in our pews. They surpass it by a mile. There's someone in my life who encourages me to grow spiritually. When growing up, I had close personal friends who were adults from my church. I feel emotionally close to someone at my church. Meaningful, deep, intergenerational relationships. I'm going to say that again. Meaningful, deep, intergenerational relationships. Number two, resilient disciples have cultural discernment. So resilient disciples are more likely to say, my church gives me wisdom for how to live faithfully in a secular world. Wisdom for living with people who believe differently than me. I'm seeing a trend with this word wisdom. Help with living wisely when it comes to sex and sexuality. Help with living wisely when it comes to technology. Tools for wisely managing my money. What do resilient disciples get in their local churches? Wisdom to have cultural discernment. When is the last time, looking at that fourth item there, when is the last time you preached a sermon on living wisely when it comes to technology? You know? When's the last time you preached a sermon about wisely managing my money? I just gave you a 5-part sermon series. There you go. This is what millennials want. There you go, 5-part sermon series. Wisdom, cultural discernment. You're welcome. If you're all preaching it in the next 2 months, they may be on to us, but that's okay. Cultural discernment. Number 3, resilient disciples are discipled vocationally. This is huge. This is huge. If you were to ask me what is the one thing that churches are missing that young people need, it is this. It is this. I will stake my life on it. Vocational discipleship. What does it look like to help young people flourish in their workplace and to connect their vocation with their faith? To connect their vocation with their faith. I shared this data with my father, who's a retired electrical engineer from the Coca-Cola company, a very accomplished inventor. I shared this data with him. And you know what he did? He marched into the young adult ministry and said, where are all the engineers? I would like to mentor them. And so he gets coffee with them once a month. That's it, once a month. But he has vocationally connected with the young emerging engineers in their local church. And they're not just talking about engineering things, he's vocationally discipling them. Vocational discipleship. What does that look like? As our president often says, David Kinnaman, as he says, what would it look like for us to have vocation Bible schools instead of vacation Bible schools? Right? We have to think about this. What does vocational discipleship mean? Okay, 2 more things for you. Resilient disciples have a deep sense of mission. I would like to applaud you all as mainline leaders because I think you guys do this really well. I do. I think our non-mainline brothers and sisters have a lot to learn from you. I think this is one of your strengths. So let's capitalize on this strength as mainline churches. I want others to see Jesus reflected in me through my words and actions. And then there's an evangelism item in there. I'm excited by the mission of the church in today's world. A major part of my purpose in life is to serve others. How do we activate this deep sense of mission? Invite them to the table. Invite them to the table. Let them feel like they're stewarding and owning something. Fuel this deep sense of mission. And finally, countercultural mission. What resilient disciples experience at church. What does it look like for us to stoke compassion? Resilient disciples feel like they better understand the needs of the poor because of their involvement in a local church. They have the opportunity to serve the poor. They found a cause or an issue that they're passionate about. Compassion is stoked in the hearts of resilient disciples when they're a part of a local church. Are we stoking that compassion in the hearts of our young people? Hopefully that's helpful for you. A small checklist of things that we need to maybe self-evaluate. Are we serving emerging generations? Thank you.
All right, we're gonna have a little Q&A. That was really awesome. I was frantically trying to take pictures as fast as I could, and then I realized I have your slide deck on my... You all don't have it though, so I hope you had a chance to take some pictures. That was really great. Thank you so much, Savannah. Really just exactly what we were looking for. And I don't know how you felt, I felt a lot of hope in that. I felt not only hope, but I felt that it pointed to real possibilities for our churches being able to reach people. And I will say, not all of you are in mainline churches, but most of you are. I felt like there was a lot of hope for mainline churches in particular if we can figure out how to connect with this generation. The message that we have and how we try to do ministry is one that seems to resonate with many young people. I want to ask you a couple of questions before we wrap up this session. So we didn't talk much about technology in terms of, first of all, I love the Wisdom sermon series. We will plan on doing that sermon series here at Resurrection soon. There were several sermon series I got from here, but I want to talk about technology. We talked about some folks not staying connected to their church. I'm thinking about that, nearly 20%, 1 in 5, who haven't been to church in the last year, or really 19 months now. And I'm thinking that has to do, at least with some of them, with technology, either their lack of access to technology or their local congregations not doing technology well. So help us understand the importance of technology for evangelism, for discipleship, for ministry going forward. I mean, I think something fundamentally has changed with COVID and how we do ministry, and not everybody, I think some are thinking, when do we get to go back and stop doing all that stuff with the technology? Do you see that as the future? We'll go back to not doing the technology, or how important is technology for ministry going forward?
That's exactly the right question to ask, is how is technology going to play into the long-term strategy now as the local church? We asked church-going adults, actually within the past couple of months, after the COVID-19 pandemic, how do you feel about church and technology? What are you looking for? I'm going to unpack this a little bit more in my breakout this afternoon, but one of the statistics that we found is that 40% of those churchgoers are saying, I would like for a hybrid solution to be offered to me. And they feel that way because many of those who have experienced technology or who have been attending church digitally over the course of the last 2 years, they do feel like to a certain extent they're able to remain connected to the congregation. They still feel cared for by the pastor, and they really like the flexibility of what digital is offering them. So we at Barna do believe that hybrid and digital is here to stay. However, we absolutely also see that churchgoers are saying, but I don't want to neglect meeting together in any form or fashion. That's still very important to me. So what does it look like for a church to be able to offer me the flexibility of technology? So 40% feel this way. Offer me technology, but also for me to remain connected and to continue to have in-person experiences as I'm able. That's how they feel. I think now is the moment for pastors to ask ourselves, okay, if this is how they feel, what's my response going to be? Am I going to give them that hybrid solution? Are we going to do small groups or discipleship digitally? What does that look like to continue that perhaps? Or how are we going to meet that need or understand that desire while continuing to preserve our identity as a church that meets in person?
That's great. It's interesting. I like to shop for certain things in person, but I've come to the place where I'm actually willing to shop online when I need to for some things, and for most things I'm shopping online. And I think, and I want what I want when I want it. I don't want to have to wait for when you want to give it to me. which is part of the value of technology as well, is that if you're on YouTube or somewhere else, and we found here at Resurrection, we have an online platform, and that used to be where most people worshiped with us online, and we've been doing that for 10 years. But today, YouTube is increasingly the platform people are going to because they can access worship whenever they want. They don't have to wait till Saturday at 5, Sunday morning 7:30, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, Sunday night at 5. They can go on at 10:37 if they want to, or they can go on when, whatever time they like to go on. And it seems like to me that as you're talking about technology, people want to be together, but they are also wanting to access what they want when they want it. Yeah. And so anyway, let's talk a little bit about what would you say to these folks about their own use of technology moving forward in their churches? Are there some things maybe we're not thinking about? We've been thinking about worship. What are the other places where we can use technology?
Sure. We've seen a lot of success with prayer digitally. A lot of churches have really connected with their people digitally and helped people remain engaged by doing prayer efforts, prayer groups, corporate prayer, call and response sorts of moments digitally. So do you have a digital prayer strategy at all? I would say as a church, has prayer been a part of your strategy throughout the pandemic? What does prayer look like for your congregation moving forward? That's one thing. Digital discipleship actually has been very successful for many congregations. Some have struggled. So I would say if you are a congregation that has struggled, maybe connect over the course of the next couple of days with a church that has seen success with doing discipleship digitally and swap ideas and talk about it. Because some have struggled, and I do want to acknowledge that. But having small groups digitally, we've actually seen, thirdly and finally, a lot of success with digital sort of evangelism efforts, meaning having spiritual conversations or facilitating deep conversations just about life in digital environments, those sorts of really safe spaces. We've seen a lot of non-Christians choosing to participate in those sorts of conversations on digital platforms because they don't have to get in their car and drive to the church and walk in the sanctuary and feel all alone. They're able to sit on their couch and then have those deep conversations with Christians, which is something that many of them want to do. So are we creating safe spaces for conversation or maybe even evangelism, right, digitally? So those are three things.
That's excellent. Okay, I want to ask a show of hands. How many of you are currently at your church doing things online that you never thought it was okay to do online before? Right. So we had great debates about whether to have online communion, right? And in the United Methodist Church, there were some bishops who were like, no, and then there was others like, yeah, you got to do it because, we just need to do it. Our Catholic friends chose not to do that, but I will tell you one of the most meaningful moments in worship is when we have the Eucharist, and I'm standing behind the pulpit here, and I've asked at the beginning of the service, you all do the same thing, I'm guessing, but for people to have bread and wine or bread and grape juice ready, or crackers and water, even if they don't have wine or grape juice, and have that ready. And when it comes time in the service, to offer the prayer, the great thanksgiving, and then to invite them to break the bread with me. And I have this sense in that moment, it's really been a remarkable, holy moment where I feel like there are thousands of people in this moment right now who are breaking bread together in their homes and participating in the wine, and that we are bound together even though we can't see each other in that moment. And the other thing that strikes me about how we're doing worship online and other things online is the importance of engaging people, that they're not just watching. Like, we tell people light a candle at the beginning of worship. We want them to do that so that they feel like this is your sanctuary, that candle, you're the acolyte in your own service here, but looking for ways that people can do something while they're in worship so they feel engaged as opposed to watching something online. Do you sense that, or do you get that feeling in your research?
Yes, absolutely, which is why we're encouraging church leaders to do call and response prayers, adding liturgical elements back in. People have actually really enjoyed that. Churchgoers have found great peace and comfort in the return of liturgical elements. So if you typically do not have liturgical elements as a part of your services, maybe reincorporating call and response prayers or communal prayers where everyone's lifting their voices together, that sort of thing. Also, if you're a small enough congregation where you're just using Zoom maybe for church, encouraging people to turn on their camera as much as possible, and even calling out people by name. I actually had the opportunity to watch a digital service for a small little country church, beautiful church, and I was watching them. He just kind of put his iPhone on a platform and just kind of stood in front of it and talked, and that was their digital service. But he knew who was attending, and he took just the first 5 to 10 minutes of each service and of the service I was watching to address people by name. And literally, he just kind of squinted at the camera and was like, "Hey, Linda, how's your son doing? Type it in the chat." And it was the sweetest thing. And it just made me feel seen and known. And so what are the ways that we are connecting with our people so that they feel seen and known and so that they can participate? I love the candle idea.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful.
Well, we welcome new members through Coffee with the Pastors. And for the longest time during COVID, we just didn't have it because I said, no, we have to be in person for this. This is one of those things we have to do together in person. And then after 6 months or 5 months, it's like, no, we have to go ahead and do it online. And we did it online, and used this as a Zoom opportunity. So we had, at one of them, I think we had 300 or 400 people. We had 200 people, a couple hundred, 550. We've done multiple of these over time. But doing it on Zoom, so usually I'm in a big room, and they're sitting at tables, and I can't see their faces when I'm speaking. And here, they're 12 inches or 15 inches away from me. And I start calling out their names during this thing, and it's just the coolest thing. They light up, they're smiling, they're waving at me, and we have this engagement in a way that you would have never thought possible, and it's even more engaging than if we were doing it in person in our fellowship hall. It's just been amazing. Okay, last thing I want to mention or ask you is something you said I think many of us may not recognize, and I'm going to talk about it in the next session. You said millennials were looking for people to be engaged with in intergenerational relationships. So often we think that millennials want to be around millennials and Gen Xers want to be around Gen Xers, but that's not what we've learned here. And tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, so a lot of our clients at Barna are church architecture firms, so thinking about building spaces and stuff. And one of the trends that we're noticing with new builds, a lot of churches that are building new spaces, is they're not building separate student spaces or young adult spaces. They are, where they have their own entrance off to the side and they're treated like their own little club. Because there's an interesting need that we're seeing, especially with young people today, is they really, really need that intergenerational connection. They hunger for it a lot more than you may think. So the question is, what does it look like to incorporate young people into the lifeblood of the church? I would say students, but also young adults that are in their 20s and young families that are in their 30s. What does it look like to maybe for once not do Sunday school, where you separate people into age cohorts? What would that look like? What would it look like maybe you just want to shake things up for a summer and that's it, and give it a try. Maybe this spring you want to give it a try where you get representatives from each different age cohort to participate in small groups, and you get them sitting around a table together. We've seen in our research that actually does wonders for churches today for a multitude of reasons. One, because young people are craving those intergenerational relationships. They need it. They're so confused. They're so lost. They're so anxious. I can say that because I am a millennial. We are so confused. We are so lost, and we need shepherds to care for us. And also, as church leaders, we need to find ways to activate our boomers and our elders. What does it look like to keep them engaged and to honor them and their legacy and the wisdom that they carry? So if we're saying, hey, we're inviting you to befriend and invest in our young people as a church, we care about you, and we want to honor you in this way. We've seen great success. Our research absolutely suggests that really there's a new era of church coming where we're not separated by age cohorts.
Thank you, that's great. Okay, would you join me in thanking Savannah Kimberlin for her work today? Really appreciate you being with us. This was awesome, Savannah. Thank you. I'm gonna ask you to do this. I'd like to invite you to stand, turn to 2 or 3 other people around you. Don't get too close. But I want you to say, what was the 1 or 2 takeaways I want to take away from this session? We're gonna jump right in then with how this relates to our life in ministry together. But turn to somebody else. What are 1 or 2 takeaways from this session? I'm gonna give you 30 seconds. You've got 30 seconds. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, go ahead and take a seat if you would. And we've got a lot of material we're going to cover in a short period of time. So I want you to continue your conversations over lunch, but I'm going to have you go ahead and take a seat right now. All right. This summer I spent time reading a book by Father W. Paul Jones. He's was a United Methodist pastor, then and a theologian. He taught at St. Paul School of Theology, then became a Roman Catholic priest and is a Trappist monk. And he lives in a small monastery in central Missouri that he built himself, or hermitage. And he's 90 years old. He wrote his latest book, and it's a book in which it's titled Remnant Christianity in a Post-Christian World. And his assessment, you read the first 200 pages, you're going to be terribly depressed or have your eyes somewhat open, because he's really giving the facts about what's happening in the church world and in the religious world today as a result of postmodernism. And postmodernism is a wonderful thing in certain places and raises some serious philosophical challenges. It sort of gets in your blood and you don't really even think about it, where you're not sure you trust any authority and you're not sure there is any absolute truth and you're not really certain that you believe anymore the kinds of things that Christianity offers. And beyond that, you find that it raises questions and questions that the church rightly should be answering, about, okay, how do things really work? If I pray, does God really answer all those prayers in the way that I pray them? Because that doesn't seem to be my experience. And this kind of gets back to what we talked about last night, or at Labora. And a whole host of other things that, leave us. Are all of our friends who go to other, who are part of other faiths, are they really all going to burn in hell for all eternity? Like, these are things that people used to come to church because they were afraid of going to hell. But today, we're not sure that we believe in hell anymore. I'm talking about a society, as a people. And anyway, so he's suggested that postmodernism and a host of other factors have contributed to an irreversible decline in people who will find that Christian faith and church attendance has credibility or appeal. And he points as an example to his own children, who none of whom are going to church. And many of you would testify to the same thing, that maybe your kids are not actively involved in church right now, and it's really hard. You haven't been able to figure out what to do to get them there, and you feel like a failure because you're a pastor or a church leader and your kids are not in church. And not only feeling like a failure, you love your kids and you want them desperately to know Christ and to follow him. And so we live in this world in which, we see this increasing number of nuns, as we've talked about, the people who claim no religious affiliation, and it's easy for us to begin to be a bit depressed about that. I want to go back to this chart that you had, Savannah, where we look at the weekly church attendance, right? And we live through these things. We saw at periods of crisis where attendance goes up, and then we see where we are today, and 29%, of weekly church attendance, Americans going to church weekly. And I think you all, Savannah, her team has talked about people who, maybe it's not even 29%, maybe it's 25% of people who are, practicing Christians who claim that they're Christians. They think their faith is really important to them, and yet not actually attending worship very frequently. So, weekly attendance aside, if we look at generations, I want to show you another slide here. This is, let's see, guys, there we go. This slide is looking at young adults who are unaffiliated, and more of them today than in the past. And actually, you can see this is actually across generations. So the pink is 18 to 29-year-olds. This is in 1986. And 1996, 18 to 29-year-olds. But you also find 30 to 49-year-olds, and down here you find 50 to 64-year-olds and 65 up. And you'll notice that actually the people who are 65 and up today are 400% more likely to not be affiliated with a church than those in 1986. So you actually see this is across all age cohorts, an increasing number of people who are unaffiliated with a church today. All right, so we look at that information, and it's easy for us to get a bit depressed about that. 36% of young adults today saying, I'm not affiliated with any local congregation. But there are others of us who look at this data and say, okay, but wait a minute, let's see where we find hope in this. And that's part of what I appreciated Savannah did for us today. So 64% of Americans continue to claim the Christian faith. 64% of Americans continue to claim a Christian faith. So that tells me even if only 29% are going to church weekly, 64% say, but I am a Christian. So that tells me that there's a whole lot of people out there who are open to what we have to offer if we can figure out how to connect with them, right? And that's true across age generations. 65% of Americans, 65% claim to be Christians. 25% claim to go to church every week. That 40% delta is a huge opportunity for us in connecting with people. They've already said that they're interested in what we have to offer. I want to think about something I've shared with some of you before. Benjamin Zander is the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic, and he talks about, so this data that we have of, what's going on in our world around us and religious affiliation and all that. He talks about symphony conductors, and he says symphony conductors are of two types. One are the types who are constantly living in a downward spiral kind of thinking. Right, and when they talk about the fact that nobody likes classical music anymore. The schools aren't teaching good music, to their children. People hate pop. They love pop music, and there's so few radio stations that play our music, and so you have all of this, and it begins to sound sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what happens is there's people who are, we like to lament with each other about how bad things are. It's just that folks aren't necessarily drawn to people who are constantly lamenting this. Right? So we as church people, we can talk about how hard it is with each other, and sometimes that feels good, but really in the end, nobody's drawn to Debbie Downer, right? Debbie Nixon's around here somewhere, but she is not a Debbie Downer. But I just think about we are drawn to people who, Zander said, radiate possibility. And so he shows this chart of radiating possibility. And he says these folks look at the same data, but they see opportunity where these folks only see depression. So the folks who are downward spiral thinkers, they look at what's going on, and all they can see is it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And the folks who radiate possibilities say, yes, it's true. The schools are not teaching classical music. What would happen if the symphony and the orchestra, in our city decided to volunteer in the schools? Or they're going to say, yes, it's true. Everybody loves pop music today. Nobody seems to like our music. What would happen if we did a pop series where we brought in rock and roll musicians to work with the symphony and we did things together, right? And so they begin looking at this. They say, yes, it's true. 97% of the population doesn't listen to classical music, but that means we have a 97% untapped market for what we're offering. How awesome is that, right? This is the way that they begin to think. And I want to encourage you to be thinking that way, because while things may be difficult right now, there's also huge opportunities that are before us. I recently was in Seattle, Washington, and then my wife and I took a day trip out to an area about 2 hours away from Seattle. And while we were there, we went in town, and as we pulled into town, there was an optical shop in town. And I'd been thinking about getting new glasses. I'd had the same glasses for like 6 years, and I saw this optical shop, and I thought, I should go in there. So LaVon and I went in, and I began talking to the woman. She showed me these glasses that I have on my head right now. And I thought, yeah, but I'm not going to buy glasses in 2 hours outside of Seattle. How's that work, But so LaVon, she showed that, I said, yeah, those are kind of nice. I'll think about it, right? And when you say I'll think about it, what does that mean? It means I'm not coming back. But so we went to lunch, and as we were at lunch, I couldn't stop thinking about this woman selling her glasses, and I don't know why. She was the owner of this little optical shop. And so anyway, I said, LaVon, I think I'm going to go buy those glasses. I don't know why. I do know why. I think it was the Holy Spirit. So I went back to the shop, and I said, hey, I think I'm going to go ahead and get those glasses. Oh, that's great. And so she started to write it up. And I said, I noticed something about her. I noticed she seemed sad. And I said, are you doing okay? And she said, it's been a really horrible year. And I said, well, tell me about it. And I sat down. And I realized why I was back in her shop. And I said, I know it's been hard for small businesses during COVID. She said, yeah, that's been hard. And she said, we opened this business just a couple months before COVID. But she said, it wasn't that. She said, my husband took his life last year this time and left me to raise our 3-year-old little girl in this business we'd started. And it's been so hard. And I realized this was one of those Holy Spirit moments, And so we just sat for the next 20 minutes talking about her life and the pain and talking about suicide and how I've been with parishioners who had survived suicide, of the loss of a family member, and then how they survived that, and then what did it look like, and that there was hope, and that it wasn't your fault. And, we had this whole pastoral conversation while we were sitting there in the shop. No other customer came in. It was almost like the Holy Spirit kept people away just so we could talk. And part of what I asked her was, do you have a church family? Do you have a church background? In this part of the world, in Northwest, not very many people going to church. She said, well, I'm Episcopalian, but I haven't been to church in a long time. I said, well, we're cousins. I'm Methodist, and I'm, really... And And then I began to talk to her about why a faith community matters, to be able to walk through a journey like this with other people who are going to come by your side and care for you. And before we were finished, I said, would it be okay with you if I prayed with you? I said, I start my day every morning. I was on my knees this morning, at our Airbnb, and next to my bed, and I just said, Jesus, please use me today. Help me to pay attention and see who needs love, and help me to be your presence for someone else. And I said, I don't think it was an accident. I came in your shop. The moment I drove in town, yours was the first shop I saw, and I thought, I have to go in. And I said, I wasn't going to come back and buy these glasses. And while I was at lunch, I felt like I had to come back in. And I said, I feel like God sent me here to be a visible reminder that you are loved and that he's walking with you through this pain and that you are going to be okay and your little girl's going to be okay. And she's in tears by this time, And I said, would it be okay if we prayed together? And we stopped and I took her hands and there we prayed in the middle of the shop, in the middle of the day. And then at the end of that, it was like, could I hug you? And we embraced there in her shop. And here's what it reminded me of is the world is filled with people who are in pain or people who need to know that they're loved or people who wonder if there's a God, and you might just be the presence of God for those people. And it told me that even in the Northwest with people who haven't been in church in a long time, there's a whole lot of people who would go to church if there was somebody who would just pay attention and listen and demonstrate love and kindness and care and empathy. And that's our task, right? And not just our task as church leaders. Isn't that the task of every single member of your congregation? That they are to let their light shine before others, that they are to be the presence of Christ in the world around us, that kind of incarnational ministry. And so that ministry is happening out in the world maybe more often than it's going to happen in church today. Maybe less people are going to be coming into our churches, but we're going to be going out into the world and take church with us where we go. Jesus went into all their towns and villages, Matthew says, and offered the good news of the kingdom of God. All right, so Father Jones may be right. Postmodernism has undercut many traditional ways of thinking about faith and why we believe. But if God is God, if there really is a God in the heavens, if Jesus is really the incarnation of God who came to be the way, the truth, and the life, if the Holy Spirit really is the power of God, who is God's immanent presence in our lives, then I don't have to be afraid of what happens in the future of the church. Somehow God is going to reinvent the church, or God is going to use us despite the church, or God is going to bring people back into the church. We have to pay attention and be open and listen and be willing to be used by God. All right, I want to share with you some ideas when it comes to, just to get your minds thinking, because you're going to come up with the best ideas for your own local congregation. I want us to think about the millennials, the Gen Z, and the Generation Alpha. So millennials are those that are just turning 40 now. So generally you're looking at 15-year cohorts, so 25 to 40-year-olds or 26 to 40-year-olds. That's the millennials. Gen Z, 10 to 25-year-olds. All right, Generation Alpha are the babies that are being born up through age 9, including my granddaughter. So I have two daughters who are millennials and a granddaughter who is Generation Z. Now, what I find with many of the millennials and Gen Z, they don't even want to talk about these generations. They're like, quit talking about it. We really just want to be people. But it does sometimes help us to at least be able to think about, okay, at different ages and stages in life, what might it look like to be the church today? And so I want to share with you just a few of these things. I do want to mention when it comes to Generation Alpha, my granddaughter, she's never lived in a world without a smartphone. So, the iPhones were invented in 2007, 2008. In this period of time, they began to take on prominence. This is her life. She knows the phone and the iPad, and she knows how to do stuff as a 7-year-old that I don't know how to do yet on my phone. She's constantly teaching. Anyway, it's interesting. Her world is different. We talked about the difference in racial makeup, ethnic makeup in the world today. She's a mixed race child, and that's not a big deal. Half of her friends are mixed race. That's just the world that we live in. All right, so let's start with millennials. Millennials are having children now, and though they're having children later and perhaps having less children, and some choosing not to have children, the opportunity continues to exist for the church to be a place that connects with people at the time when they're having children. We started Church of the Resurrection, and we were focusing on children and youth and how do we reach those folks? Because we knew if we reached the kids, we'd reach their parents. We knew that parents were looking for something that the church might have a chance to offer. So I want to share with you several ideas when it comes to parents. I don't know a single mom who doesn't say, I want to be a better mom. And a lot of them feel like failures. In fact, almost every mom I know feels like she's a failure sometimes when it comes to being a mom. And so a number of years ago, we started a ministry called Building Better Moms. And I wanted you to hear, I interviewed for Mother's Day last year, 2 of the moms in Building Better Moms. Many of them are young moms who have little children, but we also have moms who have teenagers, and then we have moms whose kids have gone off to college. And you're going to hear from 2 of these here, one of which is a millennial. Take a listen.
Building Better Moms is just such a great program. You're able to show up, connect with other women, always have a group of women that are going to be cheering for you, praying for you. There's something different to be in a group of faith-filled women that are all on the same stage that you are in.
Usually every 2 to 3 weeks, we have a meeting, we have our own little conversations, and then we also have speakers that are brought in relevant to mostly what we're experiencing as moms. It's just, once again, the fellowship and support that the moms can give one another. We help each other through, the good times and the bad times.
Building Better Moms has been so life-changing for me. I really felt called to deepen my faith with my kids, and when I started, I needed the group so bad, and then now I know that I need to be there for other women. I'm just feeling called. And it's an incredible, wonderful feeling to know that you can show up and be the mom that knows what to do when your kid's teething in the middle of the night, or you have the best pediatrician recommendation, or you just know what to say when another mom hasn't slept for hours and days. And it's just, God just uses us to connect with other people, and Building Better Moms is giving us a platform to do that. And it's just so wonderful and so important.
So what I want you to notice about that is that what we've done is started something that meets people where they are. Many of the women who are in Building Better Moms have not been churchgoers before they started coming, but the idea of being able to be with other moms, learn how to be a better mom, and then in the midst of that, the faith is a part of that. It's meeting at a church. We're not hiding that. And we understand that all of this is about helping us build a Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians, but we start with where people are. That's what Jesus did. Whether it was food or healing or whatever it was, he started there, and then he talked about the kingdom of God. He modeled it and showed it. We started a group when I first started Church of the Resurrection called Late Night Men's, and I had 2 little children. We started after I put my kids to bed, so it started at 9 o'clock at night instead of 7 o'clock at night. And we began getting dads together who we could talk about how do you become a better dad. What we find is many men today didn't have a dad who was there for them, didn't mentor them, didn't show them what it means to be a good dad. So we're trying to figure out this on our own. So what does it look like if you're talking about millennials who are now becoming dads to be able to have ministries that are going to be focused on helping them be better dads? We found a lot of folks who were unwilling to come to the church, but they're really interested in in connection and community. One of those things that some men are interested in, and this is going to sound I'm not advocating for this. I'm just going to tell you this is a fact. Whiskey or craft beer and cigars. All right, so I don't drink beer and I don't like whiskey, but here's what I've found is that when you want to connect with people or maybe outside the church, you might think about some of these other ways of doing that. So we started an alpha course a couple of years ago. Chris Folmsby, one of our staff members, started an alpha course at Outlaw Cigar down the street in the back room. And so the guys gather cigars and they sit around and they talk about the questions people have about faith. And we took the church to Outlaw Cigar instead of insisting that people come here. That's what Jesus did, right? He went out to where the people were. And so Chris started this ministry where you can sign up and they send you cigars and a Bible study discussion guide to have cigars and meaningful conversation with your friends about matters of faith. All right, again, we're not advocating smoking cigars. We're just saying if you want to reach people where they are, you got to go where they are and connect with them at the point of connection. One of the things I want to share with you is we started an emerging leaders group here at Church of the Resurrection. We had our first cohort a couple of years ago. We have another cohort that's going on right now. And what we heard a few moments ago from Savannah was this idea that younger people are interested in being mentored and connecting with other folks. We wanted to, and they also need to be specifically asked. And so we began identifying who are the young people that might be future leaders at Church of the Resurrection, and how do we begin to connect with them. And so we solicited. We said, we'd like for you to be in our emerging leader cohort. We see potential in you. Would you consider joining us for this? And then you're going to have, we're going to have people who come in and speak once a month, and you're going to have an opportunity at the end to go to the Holy Land, and we're going to underwrite half the cost of a trip to the Holy Land for you to be able to go. And Pastor Adam's going to lead that trip. And so I wanted to invite a couple of our folks to come forward. Catherine and Debbie are going to come, and they're going to share with you just a little bit about what we do in our emerging leaders organization. And so Catherine and Debbie, thank you for coming up. And we have 62 folks who are in this cohort right now. I had a chance to speak to them the other day. I think we have a photo of the gathering there, if you'd put it up on the screen. Or maybe we don't have the photo of it. There we go. Oh, you had it. All right, so here we are, mass, they're having dinner together, but this is the group that's gathering together on a monthly basis, and they're learning about faith and about leadership and being mentored, and I want the two of you, Catherine and Debbie, to tell us a little bit more about this. How does this work? What happens in our Young Emerging Leaders Network?
Well, this has been an opportunity to do exactly what Savannah discussed earlier. And I just love that the statistics actually prove and show how important it is that we invest in intergenerational conversations. So what started out as we wanted to raise up leaders for the church has actually now become friendships and relationships through mentoring. So what happens is these emerging leaders come, as Adam said, they have a speaker who comes to speak to them about a leadership principle, but really the hallmark of the program is that every one of our emerging leaders is paired up with a mentor. And the mentors, we provide for them a resource to help them in guided conversations, but the mentees actually own the relationship in those conversations. And so I have been blessed to get to be a mentor to Catherine. We've been in a mentor-mentee relationship for 3 or 4 years now, and I've just grown so much from those relationships. But she owns the relationship. So.
Catherine, tell us about what this experience is like. You were in that first cohort, and now you're actually helping coordinate this one. So tell us a little more about it.
Yeah. So our group actually in 2018. We did the Holy Land trip first and then followed up with our mentoring program. And I think that some of the feedback from our group was, man, that experience would have been even deeper. Now, note, our mentors are not going on the trip with the group that's going in this upcoming year. So you go through the mentor program and then the emerging leaders go off on the Holy Land trip on their own. But I just think the opportunity to create those deeper relationships, and one of the things that I've loved is when we paired those mentor relationships together, we kind of said, hey, this person has a deep interest in the youth at our church, or I think, maybe they would like hospitality focused type stuff. We had them fill out a little bit about their background and kind of their interests and things like that. And that way we could say, oh my gosh, this, one of our mentors owned a catering business, let's pair them together. And so I think it's been a great opportunity then for our mentors to say, hey, have you heard of this serving opportunity within the church? And really start kind of tying young adults that sometimes are like, this is overwhelming with all the choices of places that we can volunteer and get plugged in. I feel like we're helping kind of like tailor and lead them into specific opportunities.
That's awesome. Tell us about what happens when how often do you meet as mentor-mentee, and what are the conversations about?
As I said, Catherine actually owns the relationship. And so what that means is what we've told all of our mentors is let the mentee decide how often you want to meet. And so when we first started, we were meeting really regularly. Now our conversations are on text and phone calls because we just get to do life together.
Yeah. And I think even I do not work at the church. I've attended here, I realized last night talking to someone, I was like, I've gone here now half of my life. Started when I graduated high school, so it's been a while. But I would just say that we kind of plug in when we're able to, but I always know that I can reach out to Debbie, and we have taken we've taken a mission trip together since we started meeting in 2018. We've done some local serve stuff, and so it's just been a great opportunity that when we see something, I feel like, pop up in the area, we're like, hey, would you want to go do this serve opportunity or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know it's just as rewarding, maybe even more rewarding for the mentor than it is for the mentee. I know you get a lot out of this. You're getting a lot out of this. Let's go back to the Holy Land trip. So it started with this idea that we had, and the mentoring really came out of that, as you noted. The idea was, okay, most of the time people go to the Holy Land when they're in their 60s or 70s, and we thought, well, what impact might it have if they went as a cohort in their 20s or 30s? And my hope was to spend a little time with them. This time around, we're going to be leading people through the Gospel of Luke together while we're there, learning Christian faith. And so talk a little bit about that. How impactful was that trip for you?
Oh my gosh, I've told everyone that I talked to from the day that we got back from that trip, I'm like, if you get the opportunity, go. Whatever it is, drop everything and go. And I think, I just say, once you've been there, you can never read the Bible in the same way again. And, when I am one of those people, I was raised in the Baptist church, highlighting, underlining, bring your Bible every Sunday. And so it's so fun during your sermons when I'm like, oh my gosh, we were there. Where, this scripture is taking place, we actually were there.
Yep.
But it's also the friendships that came out of that trip. I mean, the young adults that went on that trip, we are all still connected. we, try and organize again around volunteer opportunities or things like that. So it was absolutely life-changing. And so when we started kind of coming back from that and going, hey, what about another group? I jumped at the opportunity to be able to help get another group there and have that same experience.
And just so you know, in local congregations, it's easy to ask some of your older members, would you underwrite the cost of a young person going at this time in their ministry? And so we work with EO. We underwrite half the cost. The participants pay for half. And it's been another one of those opportunities to spend 10 days, if you're a pastor or a church leader, 10 days with some of your young adults, and it may be 5 in your church or 10. But to have an opportunity to pour into them, but also to get to know them and hear their stories has been really powerful. I'd like for the two of you at the end of the session, I don't know if you're able to, because you took time off work to be here, but if you all could be in the narthex where people could come up and just ask you more about the mentoring program and emerging leaders, that would be awesome. This is a really great program, and we're just not doing it justice in this short amount of time. But thank you both for being here today. Captain, thanks for taking time off work to be here. All right, so this is one idea that we wanted to share with you about investing in the lives of 20s and 30s. And I had a chance to meet we have another ministry that's going on here simultaneous with our 20s and 30s, our young adults. And it got started in what we were finding. I met with some of the leaders of that group, and they're like, we are craving older adults your age, Adam. And that's okay. I don't mind being called an older adult. Older adults your age who are going to help us because we feel, as you heard earlier, we feel lost. We feel like, so a lot of times we thought, well, let's just get these young adults together and we'll get a young adult to lead them and they'll have a young adult ministry. And they're like, please, we need more mature, we need adults our parents' age, not our parents, but we need adults our parents' age to come hang out with us and to spend time with us and to connect with us. And so the mentoring program, as well as our regular young adult program, which is almost like a youth group for young adults, but it's pretty cool. There are games and all kinds of stuff that go on, and then there's meaningful conversation. But it's with folks my age and your age who are many of you are my age, helping and mentoring and encouraging younger adults. Okay, I asked our emerging leaders some questions. I want to share with you the answers. I asked them, the 62 this last week, tell me, why are you involved in church and why are you involved in this program investing in becoming leaders? And I just wanted to hear their answers because I think there's something good here. They said, I want to make a difference. That was the first thing. And I value community relationships. I want you to hear this because we need to understand what is it that's in the heart and mind of, and most of these are millennials and Gen Z that we might connect with. I want to make a difference and I value community. And I love this because there are many millennials who are not involved in the church, but almost every millennial I know wants to make a difference in the world. You know what our business is? Our business is in making a difference in the world. So we have an opportunity to connect here. I asked them what drew you to Resurrection. 3 things were the top answers. It focuses on serving other people. So you hear a trend here. Mission and community service. Is your church known for serving other people? Are you out involved and engaged in the world around you? Because that is how you're going to connect with these young adults. And then is it welcome? They said we love Resurrection because it's welcoming and accepting of everyone. So the perception many people have of churches is that they aren't accepting of everyone. But we know Resurrection goes out of its way to be accepting of everyone. It's known for that in our community. And third, it's a church for thinking people where critical thinking is encouraged. And I really value that. Many of them said, we just know you tell us, don't check your brain at the door of the church. You take on tough issues. You ask hard questions. You make room for us to have doubts. You say it's okay if we disagree, with you or with the church. And that's one of the things that drew us. I asked them, what advice would you give to the Leadership Institute participants? They said, first of all, practice in your church love and empathy and acceptance, not judgment and stereotypes. Second, value and promote diversity. So you're hearing a theme today. Third, offer learning and diverse and serving opportunities for our generation. Think about our generation. How can we serve? Many times churches think about serving opportunities as for people who are retired or their kids aren't at home. So how are you designing serving opportunities for us and our generation, including mission trips that involve families with small children? Be authentic, warm, and welcome. Don't pretend. And several of them said we have huge BS meters. We can figure out when you're BSing us. So be authentic, warm, and welcoming. Don't pretend. I asked what kind of sermons connect. And these were 3 answers. They said, tackle the tough issues. Talk about the hard things. Can I tell you, what kind of sermons do your older adults not want to hear? Sermons about the hard things, right? Don't preach on controversial issues, Pastor. You know what sermons are attractive to younger adults? Sermons on real life issues and what's going on in our world around us. So inclusion, climate, mental health. Second, preach sermons this is what they were drawn to. Intellectual, We like teaching. We like sermons that I learned something from. And then talk about doubt and acknowledge questions of faith. We have a sermon series in January called Wrestling with Doubt, this coming January, Wrestling with Doubt, Finding Faith. We're going to look at 10 characters in the Bible who struggled with doubt. We're going to talk about, okay, we all struggle with doubt. That's a reality. And so we're going to lean into that in January. All right, I want to pause and mention every December, Christmas Eve, we announce a sermon series for January that's aimed at trying to get the people back who came on Candlelight Christmas Eve. We call them Fishing Expedition sermon series. And because Jesus told us to fish for people, and we know there's a lot of unaffiliated, uncaught fish in the pond on Candlelight Christmas Eve, we want to try to get them to come back. And so we're going to say, and on Christmas Eve, before we start the service, we say, hey, just want you to know, this is where we're going in January. Take a look. And this is the sermon series that we planned we showed this December 2019. The sermon series kicked off in January of 2020. Take a look.
I am a millennial.
I am part of Gen Z.
Millennial.
Generation Z. Millennial.
Gen Z.
I wonder what Jesus would say about discrimination.
There's this idea that they are the other and they were not born here, and to be American looks like a very specific thing. White.
I wonder what Jesus would say about how we're treating the planet today.
There's no redos, there's no second chance.
I wonder what Jesus would say about polarization.
Creating divides in people, and people aren't willing to listen to each other.
We've let the old saying that if you're not with me, you're against me permeate all of our society.
I wonder what Jesus would say about mental health.
It's stigmatized and it's not well understood.
Older generations need to be educated on it so they can help their kids out, because it's scary for both of them.
We're called to create change and make the world better.
I wonder what Jesus would say.
I wonder what Jesus would say.
I wonder
what Jesus
would
say. Polarization.
The mental health. Discrimination.
Polarization.
Climate change.
Inequality.
Climate change.
Mental health.
I wonder what Jesus would say.
So we actually surveyed 500 of our young adults in the congregation to say, what are the issues you would like to ask Jesus about? And the top 4 issues were political polarization, mental health, climate change, diversity, and inclusion of all people. So the young adults set the agenda for the sermon series. And then we interviewed them, and they had clips at the beginning of every one of the sermons so that you had a chance to hear from young adults who were saying, these are the questions I would ask Jesus. And so let's talk about this. And the beautiful thing for me as a pastor was they were the foil. Like, if you want to be mad at the young adults because they picked the topics, right? Not really, I didn't say that. But, we had on Christmas Eve, somebody came up and said, yeah, there was this older couple sitting by me, and they're like, well, we're not going to be there for any of those sermons. Like, okay, if you need to check out, then check out, because we know there's going to be a whole lot of people like these young people who are going to be there. I just want to know, are you talking about these things? And you got to be careful how you talk about it. Maybe it's Wednesday night, not Sunday morning, because you got not enough of these young people, and you got a whole lot of people who are going to be mad. But you can find ways to talk about this and ask. And on every one of those issues, do you think Christian faith has anything to say about those things? And of course it does. All right, so as we think about that, I want to remind you, when it comes to preaching, this is something I've taught across the country. There are 2 different ways of thinking about preaching. One is we start with the answer. I know you can't read my handwriting, but we start with the answer. It's hard to write on this thing. And so we start with the Bible. We exegete the text. We ask how it speaks to daily life, and then we illustrate that. Okay, this is lectionary preaching or exegetical preaching. We start with the Bible and we exegete it. There's another way to preach, and that is to start with the question. Right, start with a question and exegete that. Like, what is the human condition? What are the things we're wrestling with? What's happening in the world around us? What are the questions we're really asking? What are the questions people who don't go to church are asking? And then we say, does the Bible speak to this in any way? And then we apply and illustrate that. Right? Is one of these biblical preaching, the other one is not? And the truth is they're both biblical preaching. Every other sermon series I preach is like this one, and every other sermon series I preach is like this one. And the sermon series promo that you just saw, which kind is it? It's this one, right? How did Jesus preach when he preached? Do you remember? Only one time did he ever say, did he ever take the lectionary text and read from it? And it literally was the lectionary of the time. And he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor. And do you remember what happened at the end of the sermon? They went to throw him off a cliff, right? They went to kill him. Maybe that's why he never preached that kind of sermon anymore. From that time on, Jesus began starting with the human condition. He started with real life stories. There was a farmer who had, who scattered seed. There was a shepherd who had 100 sheep. There was a father who had 2 sons. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. He always started with the human condition and then looked to see what is the Word of God for this condition. All right, so occasionally, we have, like that sermon series, we had people who left the church over that, and we had a whole bunch more people who decided this is the kind of church they wanted to be a part of. All right, I want to share with you what we did in 2021 because it ties back into what our young adults said. This was the promo that we showed on Christmas Eve 2020 that the sermon series we preached in 2021. Take a look.
If God is good, does he really condemn people? Is there a heaven or hell that he sends people to?
I've been told that you have to pick one or the other, science or faith.
I want to learn more about the teachings of the Bible, but sometimes when I read the lessons and the stories, they just don't make sense.
Our world is full of immense suffering and huge need. If God is all loving, why does he let people suffer? Why doesn't he cure cancer or COVID or all of those other things that people face on a regular basis?
Why do bad things happen to good people?
All right, so these are simple series that you can preach, but I'm just giving you some ideas. Not every sermon series is like that. That's January fishing expedition. This year through the last couple of months, we went through the book of Romans and had the entire church read the book of Romans, memorized 6 passages from the book of Romans and looked at its major themes. But we go back and forth between these. All right, I want to go to Gen Z for a moment. And when I think about Gen Z, I think about something that Dylan Smith posted on Carey Nieuwhof's podcast, or what he said. It was a post related to Carey Nieuwhof's podcast. He was 22 when he wrote it, and I want you to hear, he says, these are 7 habits of Gen Z that the church should pay attention to. And you can find it at this website, if you put up that website on the screen. You can just research it, but there you go. If you want to take a picture of that, and you can read the whole article. But I want to share with you what he said. I thought these were some pretty insightful ideas. The first one is, as a Gen Z, I want you to know, watch who I want. I watch who I want when I want. Right? I'm not interested in coming on your time. I'm going to access faith when I want it. So either you're somebody who has it out there, or I'm probably going to turn somewhere else. So that's, again, where YouTube and some of the other things that have on demand are really important. And he says 10 seconds of boring is enough to lose a Gen Z viewer. So I want you to think about that when it comes to your church service. 10 seconds of boring is enough to lose a Gen Z viewer. Number 2, if you want me to follow you for a long time, I need to get to know you. And so he gave examples of vloggers who take you into their home. We have something on Tuesday nights that I film called Vespers, Tuesday Night Vespers. We do it Facebook Live. It's really low tech. This is this last week's Facebook Live, the opening of it. Take a look. So good to see you tonight. My name is Adam Hamilton. I'm the senior pastor at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in the Kansas City area. And we are going to have some fun tonight. We're going to be talking about, Leadership Institute a little bit. That's coming up tomorrow. And then we're going to be talking about Romans chapter 16. And we might take a little time. Actually, I think I'm going to start with a little bit of time talking about, we're going to talk about the difference between an evangelical and a mainline Christian. So let's see. Anyway, so we do this, and I do this for 30 or 45 minutes every Tuesday night. I take people into my home. It's in my man cave half the time, sometimes on the back porch. I have LaVon join me, and we talk about marriage and family and those kind of things. But it's all very personal. My cat jumps on my lap. My dog comes and scratches at me. It's just like but it's a way to say, okay, I feel like I'm inviting you into my home. And I think most people go, that's really cool because I do feel like you were inviting me into your home. The problem with me is I'm doing this on Facebook Live. You know how many millennials and Gen Z are on Facebook? Yeah, well, let me just show you. So actually, these are teens, 13 to 17-year-olds, and this is the social media that they most often use, and it's YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat. And Facebook, 51% use Facebook. This was 3 years ago. Do you think that number is still accurate? I promise you, it is way, way less than that today. And there's, TikTok is now the new thing. The other thing that Gen Z says is don't try to get on my social media platform. So you got to find one that's kind of neutral, because they're kind of turned off when people my age are trying to do dances on TikTok. Number 3, I've been trained to view myself as a brand. If you want to reach me, the me-centered generation, show me what's in it for me. What's in it for me if I go to your church? What's in it for me if I tune in? How am I going to get something? What do I get out of that? Gen Z would prefer, again, to avoid our parents' social media platform. Number 5, diversity isn't optional. And he quotes Derwin Gray and Darren Sheshke from their weekly podcast, noting young adults aren't leaving the church, they're leaving the white church. Because they're the most racially diverse generation, as we've said before. So let me just show you. This is the data from the Pew Research Center. Gen Z in 2019, 52% were white. Early baby boomers in 1969, 82% were white. This is the most racially diverse group in American history. 25% Hispanic, 14% Black, 6% Asian, 5% other. And if you are not interested in diversity, and if your congregation doesn't look like it's diverse, you have, well, if you're in a city where there's some diversity, you may not have a future if you're not intentional about diversity. The people they're seeing up front, the people who are involved in the church, people welcoming at the doors, a church that's interested in and concerned for diversity. All right, so while I'm on Gen Z, just one other thing. When we talk about sermons that speak to the intellect, Gen Z are going to be the most highly educated generation in American history. So we see among 18 to 21-year-olds no longer in high school, percent enrolled in college, Gen Z, 57% are enrolled in college. Of those who had a parent who had at least a bachelor's degree, Gen Z, 44%, as opposed to the other generations here. So highly educated, and again, I think you're gonna have to speak to their head and to their heart. Not just to their heart, but to their head and to their heart. Number 6, my mental health issues aren't going away. So you can turn up your nose. I've talked to one baby boomer who said, you know, what is it with all these whiny young adults? Well, it's great. If that's your opinion, that's how you think about it. Just either be quiet or go find a Baptist church somewhere to go to. Don't stay at the Methodist. No, I'm just kidding. I love Baptists too. But I'm just saying, don't be looking at young adults and talking about them as people who are whining. You need to understand what is going on in their lives, and then to have enough empathy to say, we have to be able to address what are we going to do to support and care for people. We have had 32 funerals for suicides in the last 5 years here at Church of the Resurrection. And some of those were our members, and some of them were family members of members, and some of them were kids who went to the school with our with our members. But you know what? I don't want to have those anymore. So Church of the Resurrection said as one of our primary goals for the next 10 years is to reduce the number of do all that we can to reduce the number of suicides in our county by half by the year 2030. And we've been pouring into this. Every year we preach about suicide. We have resources about suicide online. We have tools that we give our folks. We've developed curriculum for conversations to happen in families. You know, we have testimonies from people who thought about suicide, people who lost a child to suicide. We gave a grant, I think it was $100,000 here to the school system to be able to help in their work in trying to reduce the number of suicides that were happening. We're serious about this. Number 7, when I talk to my non-Christian friends about church, I usually need to lead with an apology. So, you know what I love about mainline churches? And this is true for many evangelical churches as well, but for many mainline churches, the things that lead people to want to apologize are not things we're guilty of generally, although there are some. So the judgmentalism, the navel-gazing that we only care about our personal relationship with Jesus and don't care about what's going on in the world, that's not who we are. Like by nature, we are people who are inclusive and trying to draw people to Christ and opening the doors wide open and open communion tables and a whole lot of other things. And we are always asking every week. You see the stained glass window with Jesus? I say when you walk into the service, he's saying, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But at the end of the worship service, this is how I often end with the benediction. Look up at Jesus. So you know what he's saying to you right now? Get out of here and get to work. Get out of here and get to work, because we are concerned about what happens in the world around us. All right, so at least as a congregation, we are not anti-gay, anti-science, anti-environmentalism, anti-Black Lives Matter. We are not anti-empathy for the marginalized. We are a church that cares about those things, and that resonates with younger adults. All right, Generation Alpha, our kids my granddaughter's age. So one more picture of my granddaughter. I mean, I'm just going to force you to have to look at this. So I got to take her to a Royals game earlier this year, and I want to know, what do we do to help her have faith? Like, can I just tell you how much this matters to me, that she knows Christ? I want to grab something here real quick. You received, I didn't realize you were getting this last night, but you received a little postcard last night with the cover of this little book. And I decided 2 years ago when I started teaching her the Lord's Prayer, it was very intentional. I wanted her to know, because her mom and dad don't go to church as often as they could. And that's a copy of the book. And Abingdon helped me put this together in a really great little children's book to help parents and grandparents teach their children the Lord's Prayer. So and the book is available. I mean, it's what, Susan, is it $3 or something a piece? They're sold in packets of 10, and I think it's $3 a piece. So we try to make it as cheap as possible for people to give away to as many of their friends and nieces and nephews and children. So I'm hoping my kids will read this book to my granddaughter, and in the process of teaching my granddaughter about the Lord's Prayer, using this book, they're learning and remembering faith. So it's a sort of sly way of getting at the parents too. But here's the question I want to ask you. Who was it? So I asked you last night, who taught you the Lord's Prayer? Who was it who's primarily responsible for you coming to faith in Christ? On the count of 3, shout it out. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I couldn't understand a word you said. But here's what I know. In my life, it was my grandmother. It was my grandmother. She was Catholic. She was deeply devout. My parents didn't go to church. My dad was Catholic nominal. My mom didn't go to church after her mother took her own life when my mom was 16. My grandmother, when I was a kid, gave me this Bible. You think I was going to read it when I was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? No. But you know what? It went in a box of my baby things. And when I was 14 years old and I started thinking about spiritual things, I got this book out because my grandmother had given it to me. My grandmother taught me to pray. She taught me the rosary. She took me to mass. She took me to bingo night with the nuns. All of these kind of things. And my grandmother died when I was 13. She didn't live to see the day when I said I want to follow Jesus and gave my life to him when I was 14. But you know how it happened? It happened because I was reading this book. I decided my freshman year in high school, I would start at the first page and I would read all the way through it. I got halfway through it. I asked my pastor, I started going to this little Pentecostal church. I said, Pastor, you talk about Jesus all the time. I'm in the book of Psalms and I haven't found Jesus anywhere. Where do you find him? And he said, well, you got to go to the New Testament. Well, where's that? And he showed me, and I started reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I got through the end of the Gospel of Luke, and I got on my knees and said, I want to follow you, Jesus. You know, that happened because my grandmother gave me this Bible, placed in me those seeds that were watered and matured and nurtured by other people. And here's what I think. Sometimes faith skips a generation. So my parents weren't active in church, but my grandmother cared about church, and she was the one who placed the faith in my heart. And I want to say that because in most of our churches, we have far more grandparents than we have millennials. And I just wonder what would happen if you turned to your folks and said, what would happen if we saw ourselves as the ones that God would use to reach a new generation of Generation Alpha and help them to find faith? What happens when you are how are you equipping your grandparents to talk to their grandchildren about faith? We started a group called Building Better Grandparents here. And we have activities going on and ways to help them think about sharing their faith with their grandchildren. This becomes really important. Every time I have my granddaughter spend the night, we'll go out and we talk. We take walks at night at sunset and we look at the stars and we talk about the one who made all the stars and we listen to the animals, the crickets and the tree frogs, and we talk about that. And then we come together, before she goes to bed, and every time we pray together and we talk about Jesus and what we're thankful for, right? We have an opportunity to help a whole new generation find faith. It may be sometimes faith skips a generation. All right, I want to wrap this up by mentioning something about COVID, and I'm going to ask Cherie Reese to come forward. And I want to say just about technology and what technology has done. And there's so many things that we have done that are different today than we ever thought we would do. And Cherie heads up our global ministry, our global missions. And Cherie, if you take a seat, I want to invite you just to tell us a little bit about what happened to our mission trips during COVID.
Well, obviously they all were canceled. So every single one of them. And
yet, for you, it wasn't enough for them to be canceled. Like what happened? You had an idea that ended up being transformational. So tell us about that.
So, and a couple of organizations have done this, but we started having virtual trips. And so what we did is we invited our congregation, people who have been before, as well as people who have never been, to join us on these virtual trips. And they're very much like a regular trip. So they saw a little bit about what worship was like in that country. They could see some pictures of that country. They also heard from our partners. And so our partners had an opportunity to share what they'd been working on, because our partners keep working whether there's a pandemic or not, and whether teams are coming or not. So it's a great opportunity for them to connect with people here and then feel empowered by sharing the work that they've been doing.
So tell us about what happens on a virtual mission trip.
All right, so we do some video beforehand because you never know what you're going to have with technology. But then a lot of times we'll have the people, our partners, join us in person. And this has been really good for our partners and the people that are on the trip. Because I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but it was very lonely throughout COVID, the pandemic. And so the people who hadn't been able to go visit our friends in other countries, after one of the days, they said, that was like nourishing for my soul. And so the people that had been lots of times as well were surprised at all the different things that they've been doing. Because, normally you go on a trip and it's a couple of minutes or a couple of days of seeing the same project, seeing the same people, but they get to see everything that we're doing with our partners. The people that had never been, it was a great entry point to see what's happening in a country.
And this was how long each day?
So they would be about an hour or two each day, maybe every other day, and it depends on what part of the world we're in. So in Africa, we would meet early in the morning. Honduras would be in the evenings, so it just kind of depended on that.
So in those live shots, you're in the morning here so that you could catch them in the afternoon there.
That's yes, because their power would go out. So one night their power did go out and they were in the dark talking to us on the live times. One time they were in a field showing us around the permaculture farm and it started raining, so they had to run underneath the canopy. So it was a lot of fun just being able to be with them.
That's awesome. So how many of those have we done?
Oh my goodness, I think we've done 6 or 7 to about 4 different countries.
Okay, that's awesome. And is it Zoom or what technology are we using?
We do use Zoom, except for the pre-done videos, again, because you just have no idea whether you're actually going to be able to connect or not.
Yep. And what would the participants on our end say after they had done one of these virtual mission trips?
You know, it was just amazing for them to be able to connect. It was a great way to catch up on everything that's been going on. And like I said, it's just a great first entry for people who might never be able to go for health reasons or economic reasons to still be a part of something that's happening. That's absolutely amazing.
Right, and we continue to send funding to make possible these projects that we're doing, but I just thought it was awesome. I think we had some pictures that were showing back behind us, but I want to thank you for not only making the virtual mission trips possible, because I would have never thought of that, nor would I have even thought it was a good idea. But you could see it, and for all that you do to empower our people and to help them to be able to travel around the world where they have an opportunity to find their own lives changed by walking with people in their own shoes. So thank you very much, Cherie, for what you do. Anything else you want to tell us about this, or how we can get more information about virtual mission trips?
You know, it's actually something we're going to continue even post-pandemic. Just because, like, you know, some people just can never go, and you get to see a broader spectrum of everything that's taking place. So we will have a virtual trip to every context in the next year, and you can just find that at core.org/trips.
That's awesome. Cherie, thank you so much for all that you do. We so appreciate you. All right, I know that we're out of time. I want to mention one last idea for you when it comes to what you're doing with your worship services, and to encourage you to think about how do you provide tools for people to use on social media. So every week I come in here, I film the sermon on Friday to an empty room, I look in the camera. We have decided that we're going to prepare our online worship services as though they were their own worship service. We used to, for 10 years we've been doing online, you sat in and you joined us, like many of you are joining us for Leadership Institute, where you were watching us worship in here and you were an observer. But now what we do is we film part of the music on Wednesday, part of it on Friday morning, and then Friday afternoon, I look in the camera and we speak directly to the people on the other side of the camera. So we talk to them, we pray with them, we are connecting with the people. We design worship for what's happening on the other side of the camera as opposed to for what's going on in the room, because it's different. I can tell you this year's Leadership Institute, I am loving having all of you here in this room, but last year I felt like I was more connected with those of you online because I looked only at you and I was thinking about you, and all your names were on these seats here. I want to encourage you to think about when you're preparing and doing your online worship, whether it might be that you should have a dedicated service that you're recording for online, and that you're doing ministry differently because it's online. What we recognize is some of our people will never come back. People ask me, when do you think, right now we're 36% of our pre-COVID worship attendance is joining us every week in person. And that is deeply depressing to me. And I'm wondering, will we ever get back to where we were? And I don't know. What I do know is that the number of people, so we have 3,000 people in person at our 5 campuses. We had 8,000 people online on YouTube and on our online platform. That's what we've averaged through the fall. And then we started going on TV, which I was totally against being on television. I'm not suggesting you should do this, but in Kansas City, we thought, it was offered us, we were offered one free spot, and we thought, well, let's just try it. And then after that one free spot, we decided we were going to pay for it, and we're going to see what happens. And today we have about 21,000 people who join us on TV in the Kansas City area every weekend. And so we have about 31,000 people where we were having 11,000 people pre-COVID. So I'm kind of excited about those 20,000 people. And I want to figure out how do we get them here in person. And I want to figure out how do we get them involved in mission trips, and how do we get them involved in our programs, and what do we have to do? And some of them will never, ever darken the door of our church. And then as you've figured out, because you're online, you have people, the world is literally your parish. And you have members of your church who you might just say to them, if you haven't done this already, do you have a family member or a friend who doesn't have a church family who lives somewhere else? Why don't you invite him to join you for church and then talk about the sermon after lunch? And we had a guy, I suggest this, we had a guy who decided to do that. He was kind of nominally religious himself. He started coming to the church, started coming a little more frequently during COVID because we were on TV. And so he thought, well, I'm going to come every week now. I guess my wife's going to watch it, so I might as well be there too. And so he starts coming every week, and he sends me this letter, and he says, it's really made a difference for me to be, at church every week, at church on TV every week. And then he said, I thought about my friends who I go fishing with. I like to go fishing. And he said, we're all kind of salty people. And he said, I got a buddy who lives up, I think he said, in Minnesota. And he said, hey, you don't go to church. I'm going to church every week. And you know what? They do it online too. And you can do it too. How about if we both do it online? You want to check it? Why don't you check out my preacher? And so his friend who was a fisherman who didn't go to church decided to start coming to church. So then they start watching it together at the same time. And then every week after lunch, they talk about the sermon. And recently, not only did this guy decide to join, but his friend in Minnesota decided to join our church on Coffee with the Pastor via Zoom and commit his life to Jesus Christ. The world is your parish. Huge opportunities for us to connect with the people that are connected to the people in our pews. And I've decided, this is a kind of a relief, actually. I don't know if we'll ever get back to having the same number of people in person. But I'm determined to use every means we have possible, all the technology we have to reach as many people as possible for Christ. And if some of them decide, I'm going to watch on TV instead of coming in person, I'm going to do everything I can to try to persuade them to come back. But beyond that, I'm going to say, I'm glad you're a part of our congregation. And that counts as being a part of our church. And instead of feeling this burden of, will we ever get back to where we were, I'm going to say, we're going to be better than we were. But we're going to do it in ways far different than we ever dreamed. And that's what I want to say to you. Here's the last slide I want to show you. I'm pretty excited about this slide. I'm going to share it with you again tonight. So this is, anyway, this comes from Pew Religion and Public Life, and I saw this, I think it was published in the Atlantic, and it surprised me. So the dark blue line is white evangelical Protestants. Again, I don't know why they chose just to do white on this slide. Pew they break things down by race, but this just happens to be the data I have here. White evangelical Protestants. I'm not excited that they've been declining, okay, because we need white evangelical Protestant churches. And I consider myself evangelical, and I don't think you can be a Christian without being evangelical in some sense, but these are more conservative evangelicals, but they've been declining. All right, and so I don't celebrate that. That is what's happening. And this little slide right here, these are Catholics. And they've been declining somewhat, but they've remained much more stable. This line that's growing over here, those are the nuns, right? And so we see they started in 2006 at 16% of the population, and today they're 23.3% of the population, but I found this really interesting in the Pew data that they've been declining over the last couple of years. That there's some of those people who are deciding to come back to church. I think that's a really interesting bit of data. So here's the piece of information I want you to have, or I want you to focus on. This little line right here, that's mainline Protestants. I want you to notice, we were at 17.8% in 2006, we jumped up to 19.4 in 2007, and then, we've been declining. But something interesting happened starting in 2016. And we went from 12.8 to 13.3 to 13.5 to 14.7 to 16.4% of the population. For the first time in 50 years, mainline Protestants outnumbered the number of people who claim to be Protestant evangelical, at least among whites. Now, here's what excited me about that. I don't want to say, I'm not excited that we passed up the Protestant evangelicals. What I'm excited about is, as a kid in college, I left a fundamentalist church to join a Methodist church because I was allowed to ask questions. I was encouraged to think about people outside the walls of the church, that my personal relationship with Jesus wasn't all there was to faith, that there was both an evangelical gospel and a social gospel, that God created us with a brain and intends us to use it, that we are meant to have big thoughts and big questions, and it was okay. And I kept thinking to myself over the years, I think this is the approach to the gospel that will reach generations that are coming. And what I'm seeing here is it may just be happening now. And my hope and prayer is that it happens in your churches. And that's why we're here today. I want to give you this invitation. Be here tonight if you're a part of the United. You can come if you're not United Methodist, but those of you online, those of you here, we're going to talk about the United Methodist Church and the future of the United Methodist Church in a special gathering tonight at 6:30. Hope you'll be here. And Yvonne, I think you've got our closing announcements.
All right, I hope you are feeling inspired and strengthened, but we also know you're probably hungry. So just a couple notes for you. As we know, we stand between you and that perfectly made grilled cheese or whatever awesome lunch you have coming your way. So at 1:30 Central Time, we'll have another opportunity for you to connect with our sponsors and community engagement. So go ahead and visit those sponsor exhibits within Hoover and engage with them. And remember, you can win. You can win this opportunity to get a free way to come to LI next year. So make sure that you do that.
Amen. Amen. And so, as always, again, don't forget to check out what's new on the community board as well. Workshops will begin at 2 p.m. So to get there, navigate on that agenda tab to the workshop of your choice and enjoy this amazing content.
If you're planning to attend the optional session tonight that Pastor Adam just mentioned for the future of the United Methodist Church, you'll also want to find it on that same agenda tab. It's just below that second set of workshops, and it begins at 6:30 Central Time.
All right. So as for us, we'll enjoy learning alongside with you, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning for our sponsor and community engagement time at 8:30 Central, followed by our last 2 general sessions beginning at 9, including Bob Goff. I can't wait. We can't wait. So make sure to pay attention as well to stick around and what's sticking around in your mind, those moments that you got from today's sessions, to reflect for a deeper learning and reach out to start a conversation again with a colleague. Enjoy your lunch, the workshops, and the optional session tonight, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning.